Plasma cannons thundered as Acamarian warships pounded the surface of Epsilon Prime, raining fire and ruin upon the hidden human colony. In the chaos, Commander Powell gripped the phase shift control console, knuckles white, jaw clenched. This was humanity's last stand, their Hail Mary. The tyrannical Acamarians had enslaved 100 worlds, and now they had come for the last free humans, determined to crush them like all the rest. For years, the colonists had cowered in secret while Earth's greatest minds desperately sought a way to even the odds against the alien aggressors' vastly superior technology. And in phase shifting, they had found it, the power to move matter itself into a pocket dimension, out of reach of even the most devastating weapons. As the colony burned and enemy shock troopers poured from dropships, Powell slammed his fist onto the activation button. Machines hummed to life across the planet, reality rippling and tearing. Acamarian scanners showed human cities, military bases, and resources vanishing one by one into thin air. The aliens stood slack-jawed in disbelief as their prize disappeared before their eyes. But the Acamarians would not accept defeat so easily. These savage humans had defied them, and in doing so, had sealed their own doom. The aliens would stop at nothing to drag Epsilon Prime back to normal space and grind its inhabitants to dust. Trapped in a pocket dimension with finite resources, the colony's 1 million souls faced a grim choice. Find a way to strike back first, despite the odds, or fade into oblivion. All-out interdimensional war was about to begin, with the very survival of the human race hanging in the balance. When pushed to the brink, how far would the colonists go to protect their way of life? Commander Powell gripped his plasma rifle and steeled himself to find out. There would be no mercy, no quarter. It was humanity against the universe, winner take all. In the command center of Epsilon Prime's phase-shifted colony, Commander Powell stared at the holographic displays flickering before him. The colony's very existence hung by a thread, concealed within a fragile pocket of altered reality. Powell knew their refuge could not last forever. He turned to his senior officers, faces grim in the dim light. "We need eyes out there. We have to know what those Acamarian bastards are up to." With a few taps on his wrist console, Powell activated the network of stealth probes they had seeded throughout normal space prior to the phase shift. Dozens of holofeeds sprang to life, revealing the smoldering ruins of the colony's original sites. Acamarian scavenger teams picked through the wreckage like grotesque insects. "There, zoom in on Grid 7 Alpha," Powell ordered, pointing to a cluster of alien researchers. The feed sharpened, revealing a tall, imperious Acamarian female directing the efforts with cold precision. "Who is that? Anyone recognize her?" Lieutenant Kira Voss, Powell's intelligence chief, enlarged the female's profile and ran it through the database. "Chief Science Officer Xylith," Voss reported, her voice tight. "A real piece of work. Brilliant as they come, but ruthless. She's probably trying to reverse engineer our tech." Powell slammed a fist against the console. They couldn't let Xylith succeed. "Get me Reeves," he growled. Time to put his commandos to work. In the barracks sector, Captain Marcus Reeves was already gearing up his strike team. The men and women under his command were the best of the best, each one handpicked for their skills and sheer tenacity. Reeves hefted a sleek, deadly-looking plasma rifle and addressed his troops. "Listen up! We've got our orders. The Blues have some of our phase shift tech, and they've got eggheads crawling all over it trying to figure it out. Our job is to get in there, bust some heads, smash their toys, and grab any data we can." He held up a small, innocuous-looking device, a portable phase shifter. "These little beauties will get us in and out. We hit hard, hit fast, and leave nothing but rubble in our wake. The Blues won't know what hit them." As Reeves drilled his commandos on the infiltration plan, a very different scene unfolded in a hidden Acamarian black site. Dr. Elias Novak, one of the colony's leading phase shift researchers, lay strapped to an interrogation chair, his body racked with agony. Chief Science Officer Xylith loomed over him, her eyes glittering with cruel anticipation. "You only delay the inevitable, human," Xylith hissed, her long fingers dancing across a control panel, dripping with pain-inducing implements. "Your feeble species' secret cannot remain hidden forever. I will pry the phase shift equations from your mind, one synapse at a time if I must. Novak's head lolled, blood trickling from his nose and ears, but he met Xylith's gaze with defiance. "Do your worst, you blue-skinned bitch," he spat weakly. "I'll never betray my people. We didn't come this far to hand you the key to our destruction." Xylith's lips curled in a vicious smile. "Admirable, but ultimately foolish. Your resistance only sweetens my impending triumph. By the time I am done with you, you will beg to give me what I desire." As Novak's screams echoed through the stark halls of the interrogation center, a very different conversation was unfolding in Commander Powell's office. The face of an Akamarian male filled the main display, sharp-featured, intense, but lacking the sheer malevolence that Powell had come to expect from the enemy. "Commander Powell," the Akamarian began, "I am Tyzek. I know you have no reason to trust me, but believe me when I say that there are those among my people who see the tyranny and injustice of our actions. Your species' plight has moved me to act." Powell leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. "You'll forgive me if I'm a bit skeptical, Tyzek. Your kind hasn't exactly given me reason to take you at your word." Tyzek spread his hands in a beseeching gesture. "I understand your hesitation, but the stakes are too high for half measures. Even now, the Empress mobilizes a vast armada to scour the dimensions for your hidden sanctuary. She will not rest until your species is ground to dust under her heel." A chill ran down Powell's spine at the confirmation of his worst fears, but he kept his features schooled in a neutral mask. "And what exactly do you propose we do about it?" "You must strike first," Tyzek urged, leaning closer to the pickup. "Sow chaos and discord within the Akamarian political structure. Distract them, hobble them, before they can bring their full might to bear. I can help you from within, feed you information, but you must act soon." Powell sat back, his mind racing. Could he afford to trust this Akamarian turncoat? The risks were enormous, but so were the potential rewards. He had to buy time for Epsilon Prime, any way he could. "I'll consider your offer," Powell said at last, his tone guarded. "But if this is a trick, Tyzek, I swear "I would expect nothing less," Tyzek cut in, his expression grim. "But I assure you, Commander, my perseverance is no less than your own. The survival of both our peoples may depend on what we do in the coming days." As the comm line went dark, Powell found himself facing a constellation of challenges that seemed to grow more daunting by the minute. Reeves and his commandos, Novak in enemy hands, Tyzek's risky gambit. The phase shift war was entering a new stage, and the path ahead was anything but clear. All Powell knew for certain was that he would do whatever it took to safeguard the dream of human freedom, regardless of the cost. The air crackled with tension as Captain Reeves and his commando team materialized inside the Akamarian research outpost. Their phase shift devices hummed softly, the only sound in the eerie stillness of the alien facility. "Fan out," Reeves whispered, his plasma rifle at the ready. "Stay sharp." They moved like ghosts through dimly lit corridors, passing banks of alien computers and strange pulsing equipment. Suddenly, an alarm blared. Akamarian voices echoed from around the corner. "So much for stealth," Lieutenant Donovan muttered, priming his weapon. The air erupted in a storm of plasma fire as the commandos engaged the alien guards. Reeves ducked behind a console, feeling the heat of energy bolts sizzling past. He popped up, squeezing off precise bursts that dropped two Akamarians in rapid succession. "Donovan!" he shouted over the din. "Get to that data core!" The lieutenant nodded, sprinting towards a glowing pillar, while Reeves and the others provided covering fire. Donovan's fingers flew over the alien interface, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Sir," he called out, eyes wide, "you need to see this. They're closer to cracking phase tech than we thought." Reeves swore under his breath. "Download everything. We need to—" His words were cut off by a deafening explosion that shook the entire facility. Klaxons wailed as a robotic voice began a countdown in the Akamarian language. "They're scuttling the base," Reeves roared. "Everyone out, now!" The commandos raced for the extraction point, phase shifters already primed. A thunderous crash filled the air as part of the ceiling collapsed, cutting off Donovan's path. Cap, the lieutenant cried out, trapped behind a wall of debris. Time seemed to slow. Reeves knew the smart play was to cut his losses and save the mission data, but the thought of leaving a man behind made his guts churn. With a growl of frustration, he activated his phase shifter. "Hold on, Donovan!" Reeves rematerialized in the crumbling section, grabbed his second-in-command, and triggered the device once more. They phased out just as a fireball consumed the room, reappearing with the rest of the team at the rally point. "Cutting it a bit close, sir," Donovan said weakly, a grin on his soot-streaked face. Reeves clapped him on the shoulder. "Can't let you have all the fun. Now let's get the hell out of here." Back on Epsilon Prime, Commander Powell stared at the flickering hologram of Tyzek, the Akamarian defector. The alien's words sent a chill down his spine. "A meeting?" Powell asked, his voice laden with skepticism. "With a high-ranking official?" Tyzek nodded, his features taut with urgency. "Counselor Varn, he believes this war is a grave error, but we must act quickly and in absolute secrecy." Powell's mind raced, weighing the astronomical risks against the potential payoff. Finally, he made his decision. "I'm sending Ambassador Prescott," he said. "But if this is a trap, Tyzek—" The Akamarian's eyes gleamed with what might have been respect. "I assure you, Commander, the stakes are far too high for games." Hours later, Prescott found himself in a grimy bar on the fringes of Akamarian space, trying not to stare at the towering blue-skinned alien across the table. Counselor Varn's resemblance to the infamous Admiral Raxor was unmistakable. "You're his brother," Prescott breathed, realization dawning. Varn's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Family reunions are tense, as you might imagine. As the Akamarian outlined his proposal for a secret truce, Prescott felt a glimmer of hope, but a nagging doubt persisted. Could they truly trust these aliens, after everything that had happened? In her hidden laboratory, Chief Science Officer Xylith circled Dr. Novak like a predator, toying with wounded prey. The human hung limply in his restraints, barely conscious. "You disappoint me, Doctor," she purred, running a sharp claw along his jaw. "Such a brilliant mind, and yet so fragile." Novak's bloodshot eyes flickered open, filled with pain and defiance. "Go to hell," he croaked. Xylith's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Oh, my dear doctor, we're already there." She activated a device that sent waves of agony coursing through Novak's body. His screams echoed through the sterile chamber as Xylith watched, her expression one of cold fascination. "Mistress," one of her subordinates interrupted, his voice hesitant. "Perhaps we should consider alternative methods. The subject's vital signs are—" Xylith silenced him with a glare. "I will break him, whatever it takes." As Novak's cries faded to whimpers, something in his mind finally snapped. Through cracked and bleeding lips, he began to babble equations and fragments of phase shift theory. Xylith's eyes widened as she furiously recorded every word. This was it, the key she had been searching for. With this knowledge, she could create a weapon to tear reality itself asunder. On Epsilon Prime, the command center buzzed with heated debate. Powell stood at the head of the table, his expression grave as he listened to his advisors argue. "It's a trap," Reeves insisted, smacking his head down. "We can't trust a word these blue-skinned bastards say." Ambassador Prescott shook his head. "This may be our only chance for peace. We have to at least consider it." Before Powell could respond, an aide burst into the room, face pale with urgency. "Sir," she gasped, "the stealth probes, they've detected massive energy spikes from Xylith's lab. It looks like phase tech, but on an unprecedented scale." A hush fell over the room as the implications sank in. Powell's teeth clenched as he realized the terrible choice before him. Risk everything on a fragile truce, or launch an all-out assault before the Akamarians could unleash their new weapon. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and time was running out. Commander Powell's fingers drummed against the polished surface of his desk as he weighed the monumental decision before him. The risks were astronomical, but the potential for peace. "Ambassador Prescott," he said at last, his voice tight with tension, "arrange the summit with Counselor Varn. Utmost secrecy is paramount." Prescott nodded, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "And Captain Reeves, sir?" "He has his orders. The shipyard must be neutralized." As Prescott hurried to make the arrangements, Powell turned to the window, gazing out at the shimmering barrier that separated Epsilon Prime from the harsh reality beyond. He prayed he wasn't making a terrible mistake. Hours later, Captain Reeves and his team materialized inside the Acamarian shipyard, their phase shifters humming softly. The cavernous space was filled with half-constructed vessels, their hulls dripping with strange sensor arrays. "Those are definitely designed to sniff out interdimensional signatures," Lieutenant Donovan whispered, gesturing to a nearby ship. "We have to take them all out." Reeves nodded grimly. "Plant the charges. We'll—" An alarm blared, cutting him off. Acamarian voices echoed through the facility as guards rushed to investigate. "Go!" Reeves shouted. "Stick to the plan!" The air erupted in plasma fire as the commandos raced to set their explosives. Reeves provided covering fire, his rifle spitting superheated death at the alien defenders. He watched with grim satisfaction as Donovan planted the final charge on a massive reactor core. "It's done!" Donovan called out. "Let's—" The lieutenant's words were cut short by a deafening explosion. Reeves felt himself thrown backward, his body slamming against a bulkhead. Through blurry vision, he saw Donovan's crumpled form nearby. "Man down!" someone shouted. "The LT's hit bad." Ignoring the searing pain in his ribs, Reeves scrambled to Donovan's side. The lieutenant's chest was a mess of burns and shrapnel. "Hold on," Reeves growled, activating his phase shifter. "We're getting you out of here." The team rematerialized on Epsilon Prime, alarms blaring as medical personnel rushed to meet them. Reeves watched helplessly as Donovan was whisked away on a gurney. "Get him to cryo," he barked. "It's his only chance." In her hidden laboratory, Chief Science Officer Xylith's eyes glittered with manic glee as she pored over the equations extracted from Dr. Novak. The human hung limply in his restraints nearby, barely conscious. "At last," she breathed, her long fingers dancing across a complex control panel. The key to unraveling reality itself. One of her subordinates approached cautiously. "Mistress, preliminary simulations are complete. The quantum singularity bomb is theoretically viable." Xylith's mandibles clicked in anticipation. "Begin construction immediately. Soon we'll flush those human vermin from their dimensional hidey hole." Before the scientist could reply, the lab's main view screen flared to life. Admiral Raxor's face filled the display, his expression thunderous. "Xylith," he roared, "you dare keep such vital research from me? The singularity bomb belongs under military control." The chief science officer's eyes narrowed dangerously. "My work, my weapon, Raxor. Your ham-fisted soldiers would only bungle its deployment." "Insolent wench," Raxor snarled. "I'll have you stripped of rank and—" "Perhaps," Xylith interrupted, her voice dripping with venom, "I should take my research to those who truly appreciate its potential. I hear Counselor Varn is always interested in game-changing developments." Raxor's face contorted with rage, but before he could respond, Xylith cut the transmission. She turned to her stunned subordinates, a cruel smile playing across her lips. "Prepare to move our operation. It seems we may need new accommodations." Deep within the caverns of Epsilon Prime, two groups warily approached each other. Commander Powell, flanked by heavily armed guards, watched as Counselor Varn and his moderate allies drew near. The Acamarian's resemblance to Admiral Raxor was unnerving, but his eyes held a different quality. Weariness, perhaps, or even regret. "Commander Powell," Varn said, his deep voice echoing in the vast chamber, "I thank you for agreeing to this meeting." Powell nodded stiffly. "Let's skip the pleasantries, Counselor. We both know the stakes." As the two leaders began their tense negotiations, neither noticed the small, phase-cloaked drone hovering silently in the shadows. Its sensors recorded every word, transmitting the data to a very interested party. Third party to Admiral Raxor's command center. Xylith's eyes gleamed as she watched the footage of Powell and Varn's clandestine meeting. Her claws tightened around the edge of her console, leaving deep gouges in the metal. Fools, she hissed. They would throw away our chance at total victory? She whirled to face her team of scientists who flinched under her piercing gaze. Double our efforts on the singularity bomb. We'll show them the true meaning of power. As Xylith barked orders, several of her subordinates exchanged worried glances. Dr. Krell, a respected theorist, stepped forward hesitantly. Chief Xylith, he began, mandibles clicking nervously. The potential for catastrophic chain reactions is irrelevant, Xylith snapped. Your concerns are noted. Now get back to work. Krell's shoulders slumped. He turned to his colleagues, voice low. We can't be party to this. It's madness. 5 scientists nodded in agreement. As one, they approached Xylith. We resign, Krell stated firmly. Effective immediately. Xylith's eyes narrowed dangerously. Without a word, she tapped a control on her wrist device. Security drones swarmed into the lab, restraining the would-be defectors. Take them to the holding cells, she ordered coldly. Perhaps some time to reflect will realign their priorities. As the protesting scientists were dragged away, Xylith returned her attention to the summit footage. Her mandibles clicked in anticipation. Soon, she would show them all. Meanwhile, in the cavernous meeting chamber, tensions were reaching a breaking point. Assurances? Varn's usually measured tone held an edge of frustration. Commander, I've already pledged to rein in our more zealous elements. Powell's eyes sharp. Not good enough. We need ironclad guarantees that this singularity bomb will be scrapped, completely. Varn's eyes widened slightly. I'm afraid you overestimate my authority, Commander. The military research divisions... Then what good are you? Powell snapped, rising from his seat. He tapped his comm unit. This is Commander Powell. All ships to battle stations. Negotiations have failed. As alarms blared throughout Epsilon Prime, Powell fixed Varn with a steely glare. I pray you haven't been played for a fool, Counselor. For all our sakes. Varn watched helplessly as the human delegation stormed out, leaving him alone with his mounting dread. Hours later, Captain Reeves crouched behind a glowing energy barrier, plasma bolts sizzling past his head. The corridor ahead was a killing field, Xylith security forces pouring fire into his team's position. Mitchell! He shouted over the din. We need that breach! Sergeant Mitchell nodded grimly, priming a phase disruptor grenade. With practiced ease, he lobbed it through a gap in the barrier. The explosion sent ripples of distortion through the air, opening a momentary hole in the lab's defenses. Go! Reeves roared. The squad surged forward, weapons blazing. They fought their way deeper into the facility, searching for any sign of Dr. Novak. Suddenly, a piercing shriek split the air. A young Acamarian worker stumbled into view, caught in the crossfire. Without hesitation, Mitchell dove forward, shielding the child with his body. A plasma bolt meant for the civilian struck him squarely in the chest. Man down, Corporal Zhang called out, dragging Mitchell to cover. Reeves cursed under his breath, assessing the grim situation. They were pinned down, casualties mounting, and still no sign of their target. Then, as if in answer to his unspoken prayer, a haggard figure emerged from a side passage. Dr. Novak, looking more dead than alive, stumbled toward them. In one trembling hand, he gripped the arm of a furious Chief Xylith. Nobody move, Novak's voice cracked with strain. Or I'll... Xylith snarled, struggling against his grip. You'll what, human? You're barely standing. Novak's eyes were wild, unfocused. The bomb, he babbled. It'll unmake everything. Reality itself, torn apart. A hush fell over the battlefield as both sides processed his words. In that moment of stunned silence, a stray bolt struck a pulsing piece of equipment. Alarms shrieked to life as energy began to coalesce, forming a swirling vortex of unnatural light. No! Xylith cried out in horror. The containment field! The singularity pulse erupted, reality itself seeming to tear at the seams. Wind howled as the cosmic rift began to expand, hungrily devouring everything in its path. Phase shifters, Reeves bellowed. Everyone out, now! His team scrambled to comply, but Mitchell lay motionless, beyond saving. With a pang of anguish, Reeves grabbed Novak and activated his device. They vanished in a flash of light, leaving the chaos of the disintegrating lab behind. They rematerialized on Epsilon Prime, but something was terribly wrong. The familiar landscape had been twisted into impossible shapes, buildings warped and stretched like melted wax. In the sky above, a gash of swirling darkness grew ever larger. Reeves stared in horror as sections of their refuge began to crumble and dissolve. The rift had followed them home, and their pocket of safety was coming apart at the seams. In the Acamarian capital, Admiral Raxor watched with cold fury as reports of devastation poured in. Earthquakes rocked the planet, panic spreading like wildfire. "So," he growled, turning to face the captive Varn, "this was your grand plan for peace? Destroy us all?" Varn shook his head desperately. "Brother, please, we can still—" "Silence!" Raxor roared. He addressed his commanders. "Prepare what's left of our fleet. We end this now." As chaos engulfed both worlds, Raxor's eyes gleamed with dogged tenacity. One way or another, humanity's days in hiding were over. Raxor's words hung in the air as alarms blared throughout Epsilon Prime. Commander Powell's voice crackled over the intercom, cutting through the chaos. "Attention all personnel. This is not a drill. Initiate emergency protocol Omega. All civilians report to designated phase shift zones immediately." Captain Reeves sprinted down a warping corridor, the walls around him rippling like water. He barked orders into his comm unit as he ran. "Teams Alpha through Delta, fan out across sectors 1 through 4. Priority is evacuation of high-density residential areas. Echo and Foxtrot, you're on critical infrastructure. Get those phase shifters operational." The air itself seemed to crackle with energy as Reeves burst into the central command hub. Holographic displays flickered, showing real-time maps of Epsilon Prime's disintegrating landscape. Powell stood at the center, his face grim as he coordinated the desperate evacuation efforts. "Reeves, I need you on the ground," Powell said, not looking up from the tactical display. "We've got reports of a children's hospital in Sector 7 that's about to be consumed by a vortex. Get your team there now." Without hesitation, Reeves gathered his squad and phase shifted to the coordinates. They materialized in a scene of utter chaos. The hospital building twisted impossibly, its foundations already dissolving into cosmic dust. Nurses and orderlies rushed to evacuate patients, their faces masks of tenacity and fear. "Move!" Reeves shouted, gesturing to the escape pod they'd brought. "We don't have much time." His team worked with practiced efficiency, assisting medical staff in transferring the most critical patients first. A young nurse named Jezza coordinated the efforts, her voice steady as she directed the flow of evacuees. The ground beneath them shuddered, a chasm of swirling energy opening mere meters from the hospital's entrance. Reeves felt the pull of the vortex, its hungry maw threatening to devour them all. "That's it," he called out as the last patient was secured. "Everyone in, now!" The escape pod's doors hissed shut just as the hospital began to fold in on itself. Reeves punched the launch sequence and they rocketed away from the collapsing structure. Through the view screen, he watched in horror as the vortex expanded, consuming everything in its path. A strangled cry from behind made him turn. Jezza stood at the airlock, her eyes wide with realization. "We left someone behind," she whispered. "In the isolation ward. I have to go back." Before anyone could stop her, Jezza had cycled the airlock and leapt from the pod. Reeves watched helplessly as she phase-shifted back to the disintegrating hospital, vanishing from sight. "No!" he roared, pounding his fist against the console. But there was no time for rescue attempts. The pod shuddered as it cleared the temporal shear, barely escaping the vortex's grasp. Back at command, Powell pored over the data streaming in from their sensors. Dr. Novak, still weak from his ordeal, pointed to a pulsing signature on one of the screens. "There," he said, his voice hoarse. "That's the source. Racom Prime." Powell's eyes narrowed as he studied the readings. Xylith Singularity Bomb. It must have created matching rifts in both dimensions. Holoscans flickered to life, showing the devastation spreading across normal space. Entire worlds vanished in the blink of an eye, consumed by the expanding quantum fissures. Powell's fists clenched at his sides as he watched the apocalyptic scene unfold. "How long do we have?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Novak's fingers flew across a datapad. "At current rates of expansion, hours, maybe less." Powell nodded grimly. He tapped his comm unit, opening a channel to all remaining human outposts. "This is Commander Powell. As of this moment, we are at DEFCON 1. All available resources are to be redirected to Operation Hail Mary. Lieutenant Colonel Zane, report to the briefing room immediately." As the command center erupted into frenzied activity, Powell turned to Dr. Novak. "Doctor, I need everything you've got on that resonance locus. If we're going to pull this off, we'll need a miracle." Novak nodded, his eyes gleaming with a mix of fear and perseverance. "I'll do what I can, but Commander, even if we succeed, there's no guarantee we can fully contain the rifts." Powell's heart made. "Then we'd better make damn sure we don't fail." The command center shook violently as Raxor's dimensional arc tore through the fabric of space-time. Alarms blared as sensors detected the massive Acamarian fleet emerging from the rift. "Incoming!" shouted a technician. "Multiple hostiles, bearing 030. Commander Powell's face hardened as he watched the holographic display. Hundreds of Acamarian warships filled the screen, their weapons already powering up. "Status on Colonel Zane's strike force?" he demanded. A communications officer shook her head grimly. "Sir, they're gone. The rift collapsed their formation. We've lost all contact." Powell's fists clenched as he processed the devastating news. Their last, best hope had been snuffed out before it even began. The command center rocked again as the first barrage of disruptor beams struck Epsilon Prime's surface. Outside the reinforced windows, entire city blocks simply ceased to exist, their very molecular structure torn apart. "General Merrick," Powell's voice was steel, "execute Scorched Stratosphere, now!" Merrick nodded grimly, inputting the activation codes. Across the planet's surface, massive railgun batteries swiveled skyward. They fired in unison, pumping aerosolized nanites into the upper atmosphere. For a moment, all was eerily still. Then the sky ignited. A wall of fire swept across the stratosphere, devouring the oxygen with terrifying speed. The inferno raged for minutes that felt like hours, leaving only darkness and choking ash in its wake. In the flickering emergency lights of the command bunker, Powell addressed his surviving staff. "We've bought ourselves time, but make no mistake, this is only the beginning. General Merrick will coordinate our resistance from the underground networks. We may have lost the surface, but we will not surrender our world." As the last civilians were herded into reinforced shelters, Merrick's guerrilla units fanned out through Epsilon Prime's maze-like tunnel systems. They set up hidden caches of weapons and supplies, preparing for a war that could last generations. High above the ravaged planet, Admiral Raxor seethed with rage. The prize he had risked everything to claim had been reduced to a lifeless husk before his eyes. "Xylith," he roared, "this was not part of the plan. Where are the human vermin we came to exterminate?" The Acamarian scientist's mandibles clicked nervously. "They've retreated underground, Admiral. But I have a solution. We can use terraforming nanites to—" "Enough!" Raxor cut her off. "Your solutions have caused nothing but chaos. We will root out these pests the old-fashioned way, with blood and fire." As Raxor outlined his invasion plans, a priority transmission cut through the command ship's comm channels. It was from Rackham Prime, and the news was dire. The cosmic cataclysm had accelerated beyond all projections. Entire continents were being swallowed by reality-warping vortexes. Billions of panicked Acamarians clamored for evacuation, overwhelming what remained of their homeworld's infrastructure. Xylith saw an opportunity in the chaos. She reached out to the most radical factions among the desperate masses, those willing to embrace any salvation, no matter how extreme. "Brothers and sisters," she broadcast across the emergency channels, "the end times are upon us, but I offer you a chance at rebirth. Join us in our holy crusade against the human infestation. Purge them from existence and claim a new world as your own." The response was immediate and fervent. Thousands pledged themselves to Xylith's cause, calling themselves the Phase Purgers. As their new converts flooded through the dimensional rift, Xylith allowed herself a satisfied smile. Soon the humans would face the full might of Acamarian zealotry. Deep beneath Epsilon Prime's scarred surface, the remnants of humanity worked feverishly to reactivate their quantum entanglement arrays. It was a desperate gamble, but their only hope of contacting any survivors beyond the rift. Dr. Novak's fingers flew across the control panel, fine-tuning the delicate quantum harmonics. Suddenly, a crackle of static burst from the speakers. "This is Admiral Graves. Does anyone copy?" A cheer went up from the assembled technicians. They had done it, established contact with Earth's last fleet admiral. As Novak relayed their dire situation to Graves, another transmission cut through the static. This one was tightly focused, encoded with Acamarian encryption protocols. "Who is this?" Novak demanded, his hand hovering over the emergency cutoff switch. "This is Dr. Oshara," came the reply. "I don't have much time. Listen carefully." Novak's eyes widened as he absorbed the rebel scientist's information. It was a long shot, but it might be their only chance to end this war once and for all. He turned to Commander Powell, his expression a mix of fear and desperate hope. "Sir," he said, "I think I know how we can close the rift, but if we fail—" Powell nodded grimly, understanding the unspoken threat of total oblivion. "Do it," he ordered, "whatever it takes." As Novak began calibrating the entanglement arrays, the first tremors of Raxor's invasion force shook the underground bunker. The final battle for Epsilon Prime had begun. The underground bunker shuddered as another tremor rocked Epsilon Prime. Commander Powell's eyes swept across the faces gathered around the holographic display table, each etched with a mixture of fear and drive. "Dr. Oshara's plan is our last hope," he said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "But the risks are catastrophic. If we fail, we could accelerate the collapse of both our universes." General Merrick smacked his head on the table. "It's madness. We should focus on fortifying our remaining strongholds, not gambling everything on some Acamarian pipe dream." Dr. Novak stepped forward, his eyes clear and focused for the first time in weeks. "With all due respect, General, we're far past the point of conventional tactics. I've reviewed Dr. Oshara's calculations. They're sound." A flickering hologram of Dr. Oshara materialized above the table, her alien features distorted by interference. "The Singularity Bomb's resonance signature is growing unstable. If we don't act now, Rackham Prime's collapse will trigger a cascading failure across all nearby dimensions." Captain Reeves nodded grimly. Better to go out fighting than cowering in the dark. Powell's gaze fell on Tyzek, the Acamarian liaison who had risked everything to aid humanity. "Your thoughts?" Tyzek's mandibles clicked softly. "My people are already doomed. If there's even a chance to save yours, to save anyone, we must take it." The commander closed his eyes, weighing the impossible decision. When he opened them, his drive was unshakable. Initiate the quantum synchronization. May whatever gods are left have mercy on us all. The next hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Across what remained of human space, entanglement arrays hummed to life, their frequencies precisely calibrated to Oshara's specifications. In a hardened facility beneath Epsilon Prime's northern pole, Dr. Novak worked feverishly to bring the primary array online. "Quantum lock beam stabilizing," he reported, sweat beading on his brow. "Targeting Rackham Prime's core signature. Now!" The air itself seemed to vibrate as an invisible beam of pure quantum potential lanced out from the planet's surface. Almost immediately, reality began to warp and tear. Technicians shouted out readings as anomalies blossomed across both universes like cosmic lesions. In the command center, Powell gripped the edge of the tactical display. "Status on Colonel Zane's team?" A comm officer's fingers flew across her console. "Phase shift successful, sir. They've breached Xylith's compound." Powell nodded tersely. "Tell them they have 10 minutes before we reach the point of no return. After that—" He didn't need to finish the thought. Everyone knew the stakes. Colonel Zane's world was a maelstrom of gunfire and screaming alarms, as his team fought their way through the twisted corridors of Xylith's stronghold. The air burned their lungs, tainted by the nanotech plague the fanatical scientist had unleashed on Epsilon Prime. "There!" shouted Lieutenant Donovan, gesturing toward a heavily fortified door. "That has to be the control center for the terraforming systems." Zane nodded, signaling his squad to take up breaching positions. With practiced efficiency, they planted charges and blew the door off its hinges. Inside, they found Xylith hunched over a console, her mandibles spread in a rictus of mad triumph. "You're too late," she shrieked. "The phase purgers are already—" A precision shot from Zane's rifle silenced her mid-rant. As his team secured the room, disabling the atmospheric poisoning systems, a weak voice called out from a darkened corner. "Help, please." Zane's blood ran cold as he recognized the battered form of Dr. Oshara chained to the wall. "Medic!" he barked, rushing to her side. "What happened?" Oshara's compound eyes flickered weakly. "My own people. They feared what I'd done, betrayed me to Xylith." A violent tremor shook the compound, and Zane's comm crackled to life. "Colonel, this is Powell. We're at critical mass. You need to withdraw now." Zayn looked from Oshara to the swirling vortex of unreality visible through a nearby window. With a curse, he made the hardest decision of his career. "I'm sorry," he whispered to Oshara before signaling his team to fall back. As they phase-shifted away, Zayn's last glimpse was of Oshara's resigned smile. In orbit above the disintegrating remains of Rackham Prime, Admiral Graves's battered fleet assembled for one final, desperate push. "All ships, form up on me," Graves' voice rang out across the comm channels. "We punch through on my mark. May whatever's left of God be with us." Captain Reeves gripped the arms of his command chair as his frigate fell into formation. Beside him, Lieutenant Donovan ran last-minute system checks, his face a mask of unbreakable spirit. "Singularity reaching critical mass," reported the science officer. "Dimensional shear increasing exponentially." Graves' voice cut through the rising panic. "Now, all ships, full power to shields and engines." The human armada surged forward, plunging into the screaming maw of ruptured space-time. Reality itself seemed to tear around them as they punched through into the nightmarish realm that had once been Rackham Prime. As the disorientation faded, Reeves's tactical display lit up with hundreds of enemy contacts. Raxor's forces had been waiting for them. "All batteries, open fire," Reeves ordered, as space erupted into a firestorm of energy weapons and ghostly phase-shifted projectiles. Amid the chaos, a priority alert flashed on Reeves's screen. A massive swarm of Bioborg signatures was converging on the remnants of Oshara's scientific enclave, the last hope for stabilizing the quantum lock. "Donovan!" Reeves shouted over the din of battle. "Take a strike team and get down there. We'll hold off Raxor as long as we can." As Donovan's shuttle rocketed towards the disintegrating planet below, Reeves could only pray they weren't already too late. Late. The frigate's hull groaned as reality itself seemed to tear around them. Captain Reeves gripped his command chair, fingers tightening, as the view screen erupted into a maelstrom of impossible colors. "Singularity reaching critical mass," shouted the science officer, her voice barely audible over the ship's straining superstructure. "Dimensional, sheer off the charts." A blinding flash seared Reeves's retinas. When his vision cleared, his stomach lurched at the sight before him. Where Rackham Prime had been, a roiling vortex of quantum energy now pulsed, sending out waves of destructive flux that shredded space-time effortlessly. "All hands, brace for impact," Reeves bellowed. The shockwave hit a heartbeat later, tossing the frigate end over end. Klaxons blared as system after system went dark. Through the chaos, Reeves glimpsed the rest of the human fleet disintegrating, antimatter reactors detonating in brilliant flares against the cosmic storm. "Emergency phase shift," he ordered, praying the dimensional drives still functioned. "Get us out of here, now!" The world twisted, folded, and vanished. Reeves came to with a taste of blood in his mouth. The bridge was dark, emergency lighting casting eerie shadows. Half his crew lay motionless at their stations. "Status report," he croaked. We've "We've jumped, sir," came the weak reply from his navigation officer. "But I have no idea where we are. None of the star charts match." A priority alert flashed on a nearby console. Reeves dragged himself over, his body screaming in protest. His eyes widened as he read the message from Commander Powell. "Cataclysm protocol initiated. All surviving forces evacuate to quantum matrix outposts. Epsilon Prime lost. Godspeed." "Sir!" The comms officer's voice was tinged with panic. "I'm picking up a signal. It's Acamarian." Reeves felt the blood drain from his face as the transmission crackled to life. The voice that emerged was a horrific blend of Xyleth's familiar tones and something utterly inhuman. "I smell you, vermin," the distorted voice hissed. "Your fear, your desperation. You cannot hide. I am coming for you all." The signal cut off abruptly. In its wake, the sensors began picking up swarms of bizarre bio-readings, converging on their position from multiple vectors. Reeves stared at the tactical display, his mind racing. They were alone, cut off from reinforcements, with an unknown hostile force closing in. And somewhere out there, the scattered remnants of humanity fought to survive in a reborn cosmos. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenges ahead. "All hands to battle stations," Reeves ordered. "We're not done fighting yet." The alien bio-readings intensified on Reeves's tactical display, a swarm of hostile signatures closing in from all sides. He gritted his teeth, knowing the impossible choice that lay before him. "Helm, plot a course away from the colony," Reeves ordered, his voice heavy. "We're going to draw them off." His navigation officer turned, eyes wide. "Sir, that would leave the colonists defenseless." "I know," Reeves cut him off. "But if we stay, we all die. This way, some of us might survive." As the frigate's engines flared to life, Reeves activated a tight beam transmission to the colony's leadership. "This is Captain Reeves. We've detected a massive hostile force inbound. We're moving to engage, but you need to evacuate immediately. May whatever gods remain watch over you." The ship accelerated away from the fledgling settlement, alarms blaring as the first wave of Xyleth's Bioborg monstrosities entered weapons range. Reeves watched grimly as writhing, biomechanical horrors filled the view screen. "All batteries, open fire," he commanded. Energy beams lanced out, carving swaths through the mutant swarm. But for every abomination they destroyed, dozens more took its place. Reeves knew it was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed. Suddenly, an alert chimed on his console. "Sir," the sensor officer called out, "I'm picking up a faint signal. It's one of ours." Reeves' eyes widened as he saw the readout, a cryostasis pod tumbling through the void. And inside, "It's Lieutenant Donovan," he breathed. Without hesitation, Reeves barked new orders. "Change course! We're going after that pod!" The frigate banked hard, engines straining as they raced towards the drifting life pod. Behind them, the Bioborg swarm altered course, giving hellish chase. "Tractor beam online," the weapons officer reported. "We've got a lock." As the cryopod was drawn into the ship's hold, the pursuing hordes closed in. Reeves felt the deck plates shudder as grasping tendrils and chitinous claws scrabbled against the hull. "Get us out of here," Reeves shouted. "Maximum burn." The frigate's antimatter engines ignited with apocalyptic fury, incinerating the nearest Bioborgs as they tore free from the swarm's clutches. Reeves allowed himself a momentary sigh of relief as they outpaced their pursuers. But his reprieve was short-lived. On the main view screen, he watched in horror as Xyleth's forces descended upon the helpless colony. The settlement vanished in a maelstrom of thrashing biomass and sickly energy discharges. Reeves clenched his fists, knowing the weight of the lives he had sacrificed would haunt him forever. But there was no time for guilt or self-recrimination. They had survived, against impossible odds, and they had recovered Donovan, a glimmer of hope in the cosmic darkness. As the frigate limped towards the nearest confirmed human outpost, Reeves allowed himself a grim smile. The war was just getting started, and with Donovan at his side once more, perhaps they stood a fighting chance after all.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.